Let's move a little closer to the front lines. An interesting message appeared from the partisan movement Atesh, stating that the command of the Russian occupiers is concealing the real losses in the Pokrovsk direction. I'll quote, "After suffering massive losses, the command deliberately records the dead as those who have deserted their unit. This is how they hide the real number of KIAs and avoid complaints from the relatives of these soldiers." So what is actually happening right now in Pokrovsk?
This is not the first time the Russians have done this. It's not the first time they've concealed losses among their personnel. For them, this is a typical example. Especially, you remember this went on from the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, when in the first months they reported 5,000 losses among their personnel, even though by that time the losses had already exceeded 50,000, over 60, and even 100,000 people according to various sources, depending on the direction of operations. Accordingly, what is happening in the Pokrovsk direction is the grinding down of entire Russian brigades, entire divisions, and there was evidence of this as well. The 7th Air Assault Corps, which is responsible for the defense of the Pokrovsk-Minorad agglomeration, reported a week and a half ago that the Russians are already bringing in reserves to Pokrovsk, including the 76th Division of the Pskov paratroopers. This is an elite unit that deals precisely with such critical situations, or simply engages in barbarism, as they became infamous, in quotation marks, for their actions in Bucha, shooting civilians. Then there was the Kursk operation, where they were putting out fires and they were later redeployed to the Kherson region for recovery efforts and certain operations. But in the Kherson region, they didn't have time to start their work, and the Russian military was forced to redeploy them to the Pokrovsk direction. This is a vivid example of how near Pokrovsk they are simply wiping out insane numbers of personnel. They attack, they storm, and as a result their losses are much greater than ours. In some places, on certain sections of the front, if we look at previous months, by my calculations, our personnel losses were 1 to 7, 1 to 8 compared to the Russians. The Russians had losses 7 or 8 times higher on some sections of the front. That's not everywhere. I'm not going to engage in wishful thinking. There are completely different situations, different sections of the front, but I think over time, when we see more detailed statistics about Pokrovsk, we'll see that the Russians have at least a 1 to 5 loss ratio there.
Well, this redeployment is actually both good and bad news. It's bad because we know exactly what to expect from this elite unit, the 76th Brigade. It's bad, but the good part is that the Russians are depleting their reserves there.
Yes.
Mr. Andriy, let's move on to a discussion about money, specifically regarding our agreements with the Americans. Yesterday, US lawmakers presented the final draft of the defense bill for 2026 to 2027. And in this budget, $800 million in aid to Ukraine is allocated, meaning $400 million next year and $400 million in 2027. And this is a standard story. This is money managed by the Pentagon. We have already received these packages multiple times during the full-scale invasion. What are these funds usually spent on? Analysts immediately said that this is just a drop in the ocean for military needs, especially in the context of modern warfare. But still, even so, where are these funds usually directed?
Well, these are indeed small amounts in the context of modern warfare, but of course we still need them. So it's good that at least such sums are being allocated, that they exist at all. Usually the Americans spend them on various areas. These are funds allocated to support specific targeted programs, for example, missiles for air defense systems, or the re-equipment or upgrading of F-16 aircraft that were also provided to us by our partners, or for additional ammunition or weaponry, which could include, for instance, armored vehicles or other equipment. These funds can also be used to support the economic capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine. Therefore, I think we will find out closer to 2026, that is starting next year, what exactly they will be allocated for. However, I want to emphasize again that these funds will not have a significant impact on Ukraine's combat capability. More importantly, there are additional packages that may be allocated, or additional Pearl aid packages from our partners, Europeans and NATO countries, who are pooling funds from all over the world, from many different countries. They have already reached $4 to $5 billion, which are being used to purchase and will continue to be used to purchase American weapons with European funds.
By the way, I can confirm this because I just returned from Brussels, where there was a meeting of the foreign ministers of the alliance member countries, and they repeatedly discussed this there. Many countries spoke, first of all, about providing this assistance. And the NATO Secretary General also said that we will definitely have $1 billion by the end of the year. And they hope to reach the figure of $1 billion per month next year, which will be used to purchase these weapons.
Every month throughout the year.
Andriy, what about those Biden funds? Remember when they allocated and pushed through Congress a $96 billion package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan? Has that money already run out, or is it still being used?
As I understand it, these are the funds that are still in effect. And whenever we hear talk about stopping American aid or threats about it, it's actually referring to those arms packages that are still part of that previous aid for us.
And there's another interesting piece of news also related to the United States. I think you may have seen the list of countries in the EU published by the US State Department, countries that on the one hand buy Russian oil and gas, and on the other hand help Ukraine. And there are some rather interesting ones on that list. Everyone knew about this, but for some reason the US State Department has brought it to an official level, showing, for example, that northern countries like Britain, Sweden and Denmark buy very little from Russia and provide a lot of help to us. On the other hand, countries like Germany, Italy and France buy much more oil and maybe gas, I'm not sure, but definitely products from Russia. By doing so, they are replenishing the Russian budget. But at the same time, they are also helping us. Why did the Americans, the US State Department, make this public? What used to be discussed behind the scenes, everyone was talking about it, has now been brought to the official level.
Both Trump and high-ranking US officials say that Europe needs to sort things out. Europe has to do something, especially in light of the sanctions that the United States imposed regarding the countries that are consumers. By the way, not all countries were targeted, but such sanctions were announced and implemented. I think this is an element of political pressure and a way to show, look, you can actually handle things on your own here if you give up energy resources. Although this is actually a bit of a populist story because these countries are already refusing Russian energy resources, just gradually. They can't do it all at once because that would be a collapse for their energy system. But as far as I know, based on public data that can be analyzed and reviewed, many European countries are reducing their purchases of Russian energy resources.
I can't help but ask here about our sanctions, let's call them that. I mean, the drone strikes on oil refineries in Russia. How do they affect the overall structure and, in general, our partners' attitudes toward the fact that, firstly, we are doing this, and secondly, that there are indeed fewer Russian oil products in the world as a result?
Good strikes have been inflicted on Russian energy facilities in recent days. Both the Syzran refinery and the Saratov refinery were stopped, some of them or part of their processing. In addition to refineries, we are also striking other strategic facilities. Novomysk, it's so hard to even pronounce.
There are a lot of names for it, by the way.
Novomysk Azot, a significant chemical industry enterprise that primarily produces ammonia and various other dual-use substances, which are crucial for the creation of explosives and are essentially vital for the military's operational needs. This particular plant has actually become a central and indispensable industrial hub for the entire Russian supply chain, playing a pivotal role in their logistical operations. And just recently, there was a good strike there. The plant was on fire. So our sanctions continue to work. And this is the very same war of attrition that significantly undermines the enemy's capabilities.
I can't help but ask your opinion about peace negotiations. Trump stated that Volodymyr Zelensky has not even reviewed those American proposals yet. And indeed, yesterday, Volodymyr Zelensky in his address mentioned that he is waiting in Europe for Rustem Umerov and Hanatov to return from the United States with details of the American peace proposal. What does all this look like, and at what stage are we currently? As someone who analyzes a lot in the military, political and international spheres, what is your take? Where are we now in the peace negotiations?
I think we are now at a bifurcation point, a moment that will change everything. I believe this is something that will have a significant impact on things. That is to say, I still firmly tend to believe that in the foreseeable future, we will not genuinely reach any kind of comprehensive and lasting peace process, primarily because the absolutely crucial and fundamental issue at stake remains the disputed territory of Donbass. Consequently, we will not, under any circumstances, withdraw our forces from that region. And here the question is whether the United States will force Russia to make these territorial concessions, or whether they won't, or on the contrary, whether the Russians will pressure the United States to withdraw from the negotiation process and essentially leave us and the Europeans one-on-one with the Russian Federation, which is actually a beneficial scenario for the Russians, and they will insist on their position. We in turn stand firm that we will not leave our territory. And in principle, it's unconstitutional. It's unclear. I can't imagine under what circumstances or on what grounds any person could sign this unless it's, I don't know, Navalny or Yuri Boyko. I mean, that would make sense. But if it's President Zelensky today, He won't sign anything like that, especially not amendments to the constitution or reforms. It's simply unconstitutional to abandon our territories, to voluntarily transfer them under the jurisdiction of another state. That's why today we're watching to see what will be brought back for the president from the United States, what the story is there and what information there is about these negotiations. This is an important moment to see whether Russia will make any concessions, and an important moment to see if we can press our demands through.
We have very little time left. How is the weather in your area right now? We know that in the east, especially there in the steppe zone, the cold sets in faster than here in the center or further west in western Ukraine. How does the weather affect combat operations?
In fact, it has a very strong impact. The weather really affects this direction a lot. Just recently there were constant fogs. The enemy constantly took advantage of this fog, infiltrating with such small groups that it could be just 1 or 2 servicemen of the Russian armed forces. But in such thick fog, our reconnaissance simply can't see them. They behave as quietly as possible. They don't engage in combat. Their task was simply to get through, to go as far, as deep, and in as great numbers as possible. Eventually, over time, to accumulate there in order to launch attacks. This caused us a lot of problems, a lot of grief, and many complications in our work. Finally, we stopped it. The weather has improved a bit in terms of fog, but not in terms of other atmospheric conditions.
Phenomenon.
Nuances. That is, this phenomenon, that is, it is also rain, constantly cloudy weather. Well, what can I tell you about the frost? The frost is ahead of winter. We've eaten and are already wearing hats. Basically, we're ready.
Dennis. Yes, unfortunately, we have to interrupt you now and hand over to the television news service. Thank you for managing both the enemy and the weather conditions. Denis Yeher, company commander of the Unmanned Systems Battalion of the Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade.